silence speak? Can silence be worthy? In my view, it can. But first of all, we should categorize what is language on a human context, in a linguistics context, and then how can language be interpreted as silence or demonstrated through silence. First of all, language can be verbal communication. Human communication can be verbal and non-verbal. Verbal communication includes the patterns, everyday speech, and it includes mostly written communication, but mostly grammar structures and lexical patterns like words, vocabulary, it all are used. In what refers to nonverbal communication, it is called paralanguage, which involves gestures, facial expressions. It's called body language or paralanguage. So, as you see, we haven't found silence as a linguistic category here. A question arises. If silence is a language, if silence can communicate something, or if silence can speak, in what category it belongs to? First of all, as mentioned in the beginning, yes, it's not a linguistic category, but the language of philosophy refers to the philosophy of language philosophy. There is a sub-branch in linguistics called philosophy of language. This sub-branch of language can explore that, but anyway, we can more find the answer in a philosophical sphere rather than purely in a linguistic sphere. So silence as a language is more philosophical and metaphysical rather than purely linguistic. But in philosophy, what is the language of silence? It's all about meaning, understanding, interpreting silence. Because as human speech, like written communication or verbal communication, requires interpretation, the same is for silence in a philosophical context. You should understand what does this silence communicate, whether indifference to something, irony to something, because sometimes silence is ironic. But there is a risk here. There is an epistemological and philosophical risk of misinterpretation of silence. That's another important thing. So, and if we imagine this, how complicated silence is to understand, to perceive, I think there could be a profession, maybe a major, any degree at university, like special ed translator in silence. I think it could be a new discipline and even highly required, because consciously or subconsciously we sometimes struggle to understand, to interpret different types of silences. No matter, it could be a professional level, non-professional, etc. On different levels of life, there can be something regarding that, the philosophy of silence. And what refers to an individual level, we should better understand ourselves too, our inner silence, what it means, what it communicates. And it's like your inner voice. But sometimes your inner voice, your inner silence is nothing more than peace, and it can sound much higher than any kind of daily noise. There is a quote in Eric Maria Remarque's book. One of his quotes about silence, he says, nothing can sound much higher, louder, sound more louder than silence. So again, it's giving language to silence, because sounding is also a type of communication or silence. But if we come back to a more linguistic level rather than philosophical, I would like to quote Ernest Hemingway's lines. Once he said, humans require 2 years for them to learn speaking, for them to learn to speak, and 50 years to learn to keep silence. It's more about being talkative or not speaking in the right moment, or overall. It highlights the difficulty of silence. Like only 2 years, like kids are learning to speak around that age, and oh, over the next decades, they require more. There is not an easy task for them to be as silent as needed existentially, as needed not on a purely talkative thing. It's not just surface level thing, but just for your words to be more meaningful than silence. Otherwise, it's better to keep silence, one of the thinkers said centuries ago. So it's the philosophy of silence is its language. To be a better interpreter, you need to use the philosophy of knowledge, the critical thinking skills, and also to better understand the world, the reality, everything. Silence, the concept of silence was explored in existential literature. Like, as Albert Camus said, the universe is cold and silent toward human beings. Here, the language of silence is more ironic toward humanity. Although maybe we are also silent to the universe. We are also in daily human being cares rather than cosmic level cares. So the universe has its own complaints toward us, maybe. I'm not sure, but just thinking about that. And what refers to decoding silence, yes, it's like a coded language. And it's not only about human silence, but the silence of nature, the silence of the silence of the stars, the silence of galaxies, like, right? For example, galactical realities, they are vast in horizons that are vast and immeasurable. And what is there if not silence? It's, I mean, silence doesn't mean immobility or just not undeveloping stage. No, there are greater realities that can be unfolded in silence, through silence, between silence, and for silence. So silence can be a cover and the content, can be a structure and the composition. Can be both the composition and the content. It all depends on how you interpret that. What refers to a musical context, Ludwig van Beethoven has a piece of music called Silence. When you hear that, it's a bit, wouldn't say melancholic, but a bit, yes, a bit not purely melancholic, but has some existential dimensions in its sounds, and can convey the message of silence. And what refers to day-to-day experiences, sometimes people don't ever think about keeping silence. It is, or just not following the patterns of their thoughts. But it's really useful, at least useful sometimes, to to hear your inner voice. And as Steve Jobs said, your inner voice that can deafen the noise of the world. You should hear it. So it's nothing more than your inner silence, your inner voice can help you better understand what you want, your purpose, your direction, your axis of life, to find it. And returning to the concept of silence as a language, I think silence is indeed a language, but as I said, on a philosophical context and having its own vocabulary. But silence doesn't have, for example, 20,000 words or 50,000 words. If it's more complex and more profound. If verbal or non-verbal language require thousands of words to communicate a meaning, silence can convey it even through a few dimensions, not involving whole vocabulary, of course. The philosophy of silence is not only about following your own speech, your own patterns of words, but to see a deeper meaning, underlying meaning of everything. Silence is the decoded hidden meaning beyond noise. And as I wrote about silence on an art many years ago. I published an article called Words and Silence, and there I tried to interpret reasons why a person may want silence. It could be an exhaustion, it could be attention and focus to somewhere else, like lack of concentration, or just lack of mood, or being in a low mood, or just being in an existentially reflective mood, etc. But as I mentioned in the article, the world can be noisy, but your obligation is, your responsibility is to keep your share of silence. You don't need to silence the world, the whole planet, but you can keep, you are responsible to keep your share of silence, and that would be enough. As Mother Teresa said, what is the ocean? What is your one act of kindness in a whole ocean? Just one drop, but the ocean wouldn't be formulated without that drop. The same is for silence, not only for kindness, but for silence. And in a noisy world, silence sometimes is nothing more than kindness. Maybe the kindness that Mother Teresa also wanted to bring to the world. And so to sum up, silence is a language, not a verbal or non-verbal language, and also called paralanguage. No, not that category, but it's a type of existential philosophical language which could even require a special translator in silence, although academically a not recognized category yet, but maybe in the future, I'm not sure if silence gains that kind of understanding in humanity, that it's not just a dimension, it's not just something contrasting to noise, but something which gives meaning to noise, something that goes beyond noise and turns it into existential symphony. So keep your share of silence and turn every noise into meaningful silence if the noise doesn't convey that meaning. Or keep your silence, your share of silence, if your words wouldn't express anything more meaningful than the silence itself. So this much for this video. You may share your thoughts about your perception of silence, some philosophy of silence, silence as a language, or maybe other thoughts regarding the theme. And you may also subscribe to my channel to follow future videos regarding philosophy, literature, and related themes. Thank you for watching.